Our last speaker in this session is John Randall, Senior Scientist with the Nature Conservancy's Protected Areas Network program, where he leads a team of 4 scientists who support the Conservancy's work, identifying priority conservation areas and linkages between them. It's a pleasure to have John Randall with us today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Gordon. My talk will be from the perspective of land managers, of conservation managers. And a lot of us, I think, feel overwhelmed and befuddled and unmoored by the news of climate change and what are the details of what we're facing. And so what the work I'm going to describe is an attempt to get our heads around it and to move forward. And I hope that I'm giving what's mainly a hopeful message and a message that this is possible and that we can sort of systematize this and think about this in ways that we can work with and move ahead from. So let's see if I can help with that. I'm going to be talking mainly about case studies, essentially, with species from San Diego County. You please think of the species, the rare species from your own areas. All parts of the state have them. I live in San Diego County and I'm based there, so that's why I'm using these examples. Here's just one of them. It's a beautiful plant. We have one population in the U.S. right on the border at Borderfield State Park. There's far more of it in Baja, California. It's the Birdbush. Cool plant. Those of you who've been to Rancho Santa Ana have seen it there, perhaps. And that'll be a theme that I'll come back to. Not Rancho Santa Ana, but plantings. This is another one, Lepicinia ganderi, another one that we share with northern Baja California, but otherwise it's just found in the county of San Diego in the U.S. Torrey pine, strange one with a distribution of just one site on the California coast, a little bit north of the city of San Diego, and then another population on Santa Rosa Island, and that's it. Here's Baccharis vanessae, Encinitas Baccharis, with an odd distribution of some sites near the town of Encinitas and then out on Guatay Mountain to the south near the border, and possibly some into northern Baja. And it's next to its namer, Discover Mitch Beecham here, who named it vanessae. That's his daughter's name, vanessae. Cool thing to do. Here's Nolina interrata, Dehesa beargrass. This is also found straddling the border. This is a shot from this is a shot actually from Mexico, north of the city of Ensenada. These are just examples, just to kind of get you thinking along the lines of fairly geographically restricted species, ones that we suspect will start to lose at the southern ends of their range, and that want to be thinking about how do we either retain them there, build their resilience, or what do we do about this? What do we do about the problem? And here's one that I'm going to talk more in depth about now. Tecate cypress, formerly forbesii, now Hesperocyparis forbesii. Here's a map that was made of its distribution by folks working in the northern Santa Ana Mountains and making a management plan for it. And it's a little bit small, but up here, my hand's too shaky. In the northern end, the population there's another population that's not shown well here, and then 2 here near the border. That's it in the U.S., the natural populations. But what I think is fascinating about this map and what caught my eye was that there are a lot of findings, records in the herbaria and elsewhere. Down here, there's quite a few spots. Mainly, that's sort of poor knowledge of them. There are many natural populations, or many more anyway, in Mexico. Still a fairly limited number. But let's say there are 4 real populations, wild populations in the U.S., and some populations to the south in Baja California. And let's also realize and recognize that there are a number of plantings planted out beyond the natural range. Some of them for ornament. Some of them, though, planted within wild areas. There were a couple of plantings that this group discovered that had been planted by the Isaac Walton decades ago. So some decisions about translocation have been made by our predecessors. whether we knew it or not, or liked it or not, they've been made. And some of them have been made by horticulturalists and who've planted in yards, but those yards might be next to natural areas, or at least accessible to them. So just a theme that I want to bring up right away, and then I'll come back to. This is one of the populations on Guatay Mountain, just north of Interstate 8. And this population has not been burned for 100 years. So it's an interesting one for those of us who are thinking about this plant, because it's the only one that hasn't been burned and reburned recently. But it's mainly made up of adults. We're not finding many young in there, or any young in there. There's another population on Guatay Mountain, right near the border. And this one, the fascinating thing here, it doesn't show up too well in this slide, but that's mainly the Tecate cypress are in the ravine. And now this is a population in a canyon off the Sierra Blanca, northeast of Ensenada. And that's Tecate cypress in the understory, at the bottom of this canyon, almost acting as a riparian species. That's not what we're used to seeing. So there's some really interesting differences in what this plant is doing now than what we've expected it to do. What we did in kind of is in the interest of trying to get our heads around how to deal with the issue of preserving these species that are important to us in the face of climate change. But while we still have time, while we're not seeing the die-off of populations yet, but while we expect that we might see that, while we're not yet panicked, and we've got some time to think about this carefully, we pulled together a group of experts, and we have kind of an embarrassment of riches in the state of California, of lots of people who know a lot about our rare species. Let's use that. We figured we'd pull together a group and think through, get their recommendations. What would you do? In the face of climate change, let's talk about what climate change is, what it's going to do, and then tell us what you would do to manage these species. And here's some, I'm going to walk through a few of these, but no need to read through all of them. I'll kind of sum up at the end. For Tecate cypress, the immediate consensus with the killer threat right now is too much fire and too frequent fire. That Guatay Mountain population being that kind of exception that proved the rule. So the focus of this group was, let's work on that now. We need to protect the populations we have now. Let's not think about going beyond their current range. There are some things we can really do. We can control emissions, we can manage fuels. We also need to begin collecting seed and storing. And in fact, we should, and we already have started a nursery at one site near the Guatay Mountain population, but far enough away from it in an area that we think will more likely be protected from a large-scale fire if one occurs again. We also need to do additional genetic work so we know what differences there are between these very disjunct, separate populations. Are they the same? Do we feel comfortable with mixing and moving or not? We know some, but we don't know enough yet. And we want to do long-term monitoring all the sites. The Guatay Mountain site, again, kind of bringing up the issue of, are there actually seedlings and saplings out there that we're just missing? What are the fuel loads and what are the moisture levels? So the typical things you'd want to know. We want to know more about germination. We want to restore some of the stands that have been burned recently. And the consensus of the group, when pushed hard, was we're not ready to translocate yet. We don't want to move plants for conservation purposes beyond the current range. We're not ready for that yet. But we are ready to plant in sort of artificial situations and watch some of these plants and see how they behave, see if they can survive. Here's that Tecate cypress nursery that I mentioned. So one of the actions that is already being taken, this is on Rancho Jamul, California Fish and Wildlife Service, jointly managed with the BLM area down here near the border. So now I'm going to move to a totally separate plant, one quite different, one that we intentionally decided to focus upon with the same kind of expert think tank. This is Denander conjugans, Otay tar plant, formerly Hemizonia conjugans, pretty plant. It is, we think, still present south of the border, but I don't know of recent work to tell us where and or map those populations. But here is a map of its habitat for the purposes of preservation. It's all down in southwestern San Diego County. And this is an annual plant, sort of typical tarweed. It's a covered species under the NCCP, and therefore gets more attention than it might otherwise. Sort of similar recommendations for this plant: adopt a management plan, managing existing populations to stabilize. Here, thatch reduction was the important thing, not so much the focus on fire. Again, gather and store seeds. And then I'm going to actually skip to the next set of slides, because what happens is I yellowed in a certain theme. There's number 4 is study whether there's increased frequency and severity of drought favors the tar plant. And then it was research and seed bank and genetics and conduct greenhouse studies, so that the group clearly wanted to know more. That was the emphasis here. And then again, we got this interesting comment: we're not ready to translocate outside of the known range. But if after 5 years recovery is still not adequate or is nil, we're not really getting improvement, let's formally consider the radical options, including translocation outside the current range. Now, I wanted to just go back to this because one of the things that popped to my mind of real importance here was this issue of the fact that that decision had already been made for us. And it was actually true for the Otay tar plant in a somewhat different way. So I mentioned that the Tecate has been planted somewhat beyond its natural range, and in some places in areas where it can escape. And I know from talking to friends and family who work at botanical gardens, they've got plants that are California natives but outside the range that they have actually had to cut back because they've begun escaping into adjacent natural areas. So it's been done, right, on a lot of these plants anyway, at least the charismatic ones. Even for the Otay tar plant, what we learned was that one of the participants had taken seed from caltrans from an area where they were destroying a population for road work, and had moved it to a site 10K away. All good intentions, but the genetics might be quite different. So again, there's been a lot of movement. What I've come to the conclusion is we need to learn more about that. We need to systematically learn more about where these rare species have been moved already, both horticulturally and for restoration projects. And we need to focus on the questions of, especially, where have they been moved outside of their current range? And let's learn from that. Let's work with the horticulturalists and let's work with the restorationists. We've done that, and let's find out how well they're doing or how poorly they're doing. Another thing that I'd like to see us do is, and this is just another example. This one's Bujum has been planted. There's a real cool planting at the San Diego Zoo Natural Areas Wildlife Park, or whatever they call it now, Safari Park. This one was actually taken in Rancho Jamul, and it's big and it's growing really well, and it seems happy hundreds of miles north of its range. I know it's probably pampered, but still, wow, right? So that's one thing that that came up for me. Another was sort of a personal epiphany. I got to go out to see, and it's really nothing new, I got out to go out and see probably the southernmost stand of bay tree in the world in Pepperwood Canyon in San Diego County. This freaky little stand, and those are cholla, right, growing right next to it. Really bizarre. These are the stands we need to really follow. We need to follow these southernmost or most extreme, the ones we think are really the most vulnerable. And let's monitor them. So the upshot is, the first sketch that I come up with, and that the group that I'm working with has come up with, is folks want to bolster the populations within its current range of these species. And in most cases, many cases, we know what's up. We're really worried about threats, and fire was the big one for the species we're working on. We're also really convinced that corridors matter a lot, that connections between core areas to allow these plants to move on their own if they will, or move with their dispersers if they will, that's vital. But we also are ready to start, or in the future soon, to start thinking about extreme measures in 2 ways. Maybe irrigating some of these plants. There's already talk about that for the giant sequoia, for example. But also the translocation issue. And we also had this hunger, the groups that I worked with had this hunger to know more about the genetics, about the behavior, about the germination of the plants. And then again, I'll just reiterate that sort of ID plantings made outside the current range, and that's something that I'd love to work on with interested folks. And then monitor the populations at the southern or the extreme edge and see what's happening. And that's it. So there's like a system. There are things we can do, and for me, that's comforting, and it gives me hope. And that's all I have.
We do have time.